Hello and welcome to another track analysis video. I've been away for the past 3 weeks or so, and this is probably going to be the last video of this year. I want to say thank you so much for all the support that you've given us through this past year, 2025. Got a lot of big plans coming in 2026 for more courses and tuition, and also more cool stuff for YouTube and Patreon too. And to finish off the year, I wanted to go back to an artist that was one of my first track analysis videos, which is Fred Again. We're going to be looking at their new track with Sammy Virji called Winny. We're really mainly going to be focusing on the first drop and then a little bit of the second drop. There's so many different changes in this song, but really those two are my favorite parts of the track. And as always, there is an extended version of this on our Patreon. We go into more depth on some of the processing and effects, as well as some instruments that you don't see in this video too. And you also get a live 12 structure project and extra samples and presets that come from this project as well. So without further ado, let's jump into the video. So let's talk about some of the simple stuff. The track is at 140 beats per minute, a bit of a resurgence of music at this tempo, kind of dubstep, post-dubstep type of music. Also garage and speed garage and things like that too. But the structure is pretty interesting because there are some slightly weird elements. Most of the sections, as you can see, are 8-bar or 16-bar sections. So the intro here is 16 bars, but it's mainly split into two 8-bar sections. Same with the build-up. And then the interesting things start to happen around the drop, where we get 8 bars here, 4 bars, and then an 8-bar section afterwards, which is a little bit strange. And we'll have a listen to that when we get into the actual project. We also have a big change over here, about 2 minutes 20 in the track, where it goes into this kind of 4 on the floor kick drum, dance house track basically. And then right at the end, there's actually a big tempo change where the tempo drops down to 93.5 beats per minute, which it might just be that the tempo has been doubled. I've not remade that section there just because I wanted to focus really on the 140 halftime dubstep section at the beginning. And we're going to have a little listen to the track just so you can hear how all the elements sound. It won't be too long though because of YouTube's copyright. And let's start out with my favorite part of this track, which are the drums. And the drums are essentially dubstep drums with a little bit of a garage feel. We talked a little bit about this before on the channel, but even though the tempo is 140 beats per minute, really the drums feel more like they are 70 beats per minute based on where the clap is placed. So looking in our drum pattern here, you can see this is the kick and this is the clap. And the clap doesn't land on the second and fourth beats as it normally would do. It lands on the third beat, which essentially makes the tempo feel like it's a lot slower, half the actual speed. And if I was to move these above where they should be originally at the second and fourth beats, you can hear it sounds a lot closer to what 140 beats per minute should actually sound like. And there are two main kits in our drums here, the dubstep kit and the house kit. And the dubstep kit has quite a lot of elements in. We've got our main kick here, half kick. We've got a clap, closed hat, another closed hat, an open hat, and then another hat that's layered on top of this. We have this kind of very soft ride cymbal. Let's just add in an extra bit of noise. We've got our big echoey hit here. Then we've got some extra things that come in later on. There's perk sound, there's soft conga, cowbell, and then this big kick drum that's used in the transition into the house section. And starting with the kick drum, it has a kind of housey 4 on the floor pattern apart from underneath the clap. And this creates so much energy. We take these out and go back to more of a classic dubstep beat. And then with them, it really helps bring the energy. We've got a pretty standard dance drum beat outside of that with 2 hats and then an open hat on the offbeat. One really interesting part of the drum beat though is this low percussion that's used to add in extra rhythm. So if I mute all this stuff in the middle, we're left with our kick, this second kick, and then this conga. The other really important thing about this drum beat as well is that we have quite a bit of swing. And if we go to our groove pool, we turn the swing off as always. 16th note, 66 amount swing, which is quite strong. And to keep the drums interesting, there are these small subtle changes, basically from about this point onwards into the post drop, like this short pause at the beginning where all the open hats are basically taken out. This tiny little break at the end here where the last kick drum is also taken out. The same technique is used as it was before. We take the open hat and the hi-hats out of this section here to introduce a new element, these percussion elements. And the one that happens before is used for a bass sound. If you have a listen, when the drums cut out, something happens in the bass, linking all these tracks together. And of course, a massive part of this drum loop is this layered drum sound with the big echo on the end. And this doesn't play all the time. It kind of dots in and out in the beat. It plays, for example, in this first 2-bar section, but then it doesn't play in the next, and then it plays in the next 2-bar section, and it's just layered on top of the clap. We quickly look at this. The basic idea around the effects on this is a dotted 8th note echo or delay, quite a high feedback, and that's being fed into a reverb with quite a long decay. I turn both of these off. That's basically what it sounds like before, and then with it, nice big echoey effect. Now, other elements that come in our drums are ones outside of our drum kit, with this shaker, for example, down here. And this shaker is just an Ableton sample, and I've just dragged it into Simple and I've used the slice mode to chop it up. The reason I did this is just because I can reprogram the loop. It's not being played in any different way. It's just going through each slice one at a time, but then I can quite easily apply a groove in here without having to use time stretching to create that groove. And I've also got this loop here, which is from this Castle sample pack. It has no kick in it and it's just some percussion. And one of the things I've done to this loop, I've quantized it and I've added the groove into the groove pool down here. But I've also used the warp trick here where I've put my warp mode onto just forward, and then I've brought the envelope amount down, so it's made the drums really nice and tight. This is what it was before. Then if we turn these both off, and then on, they're really just there to fill out the gaps in between our MIDI program drum kit. Now, when we go over to the house section, as I'd call it, in the latter part of the song, we go back to a standard drum beat that sounds like this. And this is pretty much the same set of sounds. Kick drum, got that softer kick, clap, and then this open hat here, which is a little bit different. And then I've still got my conga low as well to add that low end energy. And the big thing about the kick drum is I've just taken the same sample and I've dropped it down by 4 semitones, so it's a little bit lower and a little bit longer than in the dubstep section. And it does have a slightly dirtier feel than the cleaner dubstep drums before. And so now let's move on to our bass, the main bass of the track that comes in the drop. Now, when I first heard this bass, I immediately thought it sounded like an FM bass sound. After having a little bit of a play around, I ended up using Serum to recreate this, and I didn't actually use a lot of FM synthesis, but I do have a FM synthesis example just to show you what that type of tone sounds like. Now, we've not talked about the key of the track yet, and the key of the song seems to be in C# Phrygian, very good for creating this type of dark club style music. And the Phrygian scale is very similar to the minor scale, apart from it has a flattened second note. And in order to really emphasize that you're in this Phrygian scale, you want to do what this bass line is doing here, where you basically use the second note in the scale and the first quite a lot. Because in both the major and minor scales, you will never get this combination of notes where you go from one note down to the note below, which is a semitone below, as your root note. bass line is pretty simple though. It goes from the second note to the root note and then down to the seventh, following that same pattern until we just jump up to the F sharp at the top here. And this bass line remains the same throughout this main drop section. It does have a little break here where we jump to the alt bass that we'll talk about in a second. Same over here in this drop 1.5, there's just a lot of cuts that happen in this main bass, but the actual pattern is the same until we get to the post drop, which is this. All we're doing is essentially just reversing the order that we are in. So we start with C sharp, we go up to D, and then we land on the F at the top. And as I said before, the synth patch contains 2 layers just because I couldn't end up adding the second layer into the original patch. So the first layer looks like this. It's really focused around this big buzzy saw wave, and I've picked one of the new analog saw waves from a synthesizer in here, the ARP 2600. And in this sound, I've got the random set to 0. I've got the phase set to 179, which seems a little bit strange, but that just sounded the best to me. I've also got the unison set to 3 with a very low detune amount there. The key thing with this bass though is this second oscillator is being used for some FM modulation. If I turn this off, for example, so this is without FM. And then this is with. And it's a very low FM amount, at 19% frequency modulated from B over here. And B is just a simple sine wave, 0 random on the phase, 180 on the position. There's no change in the pitch apart from the fine tuners at plus 14, which helps give it that growly feel at the beginning. And it is very important to have the phase at this position here. If I start to change this, here you lose all that growl. The second key part of this really is filter 1 over here, which is affecting our oscillator A. I've set it to one of the new filters, which are really, really good, by the way. You should definitely try out these 3 filters in here if you haven't already. I've got the cutoff at 500 with keyboard tracking turned on, and I've also used envelope 2 to affect that cutoff, which is creating the sweep at the beginning. I've got the resonance turned up quite high here, which is creating the growl that you can hear. If we turn this off, got a little bit of drive on there, which is probably doing very little. The volume envelope I've also got with no sustain and quite a long decay. And envelope 2, as we saw before, has no sustain and also quite a long decay, about 2 seconds. Now the second layer underneath sounds like this. And this is a great way of adding extra width to a bass sound without causing loads of mess within your original patch. I've got a very similar setup to the other synth. We've got a saw wave regular. I've put it up by an octave. The random is at 100 and the unison is at 11 with a kind of medium-ish detune amount. And that's being routed into filter 1, the same filter MG ladder. The filter frequency is a little bit higher, and the keyboard tracking is also turned on. And then the envelope 2 and envelope 1 are basically the same as in the other layer. And it's just adding this extra octave above, making the bass sound a bit fuller, but also that octave above is really wide. So you get this really nice wide bass sound. Before, and then there's no difference when we go into this main bass section over here. It's just the original patch. And just to show you what I was talking about, this is this experimental bass, as I called it. The first thing I actually tried out to make this bass sound using Operator Ableton's FM synthesizer. And this is what it sounds like. Now, there's not a lot of processing on there, but you can hopefully hear the growl kind of coming through. Then it's really just down to this type of FM routing where we've got 2 sine waves. Operator or oscillator B here is frequency modulating A, quite a high amount, and the envelope that's controlling the amount of modulation, taking about 4 seconds to come down to this sustained level. And if I bring this up and down, you'll hear the tone change. And FM synthesis just has this very unique quality to it, which is great for these type of bass sounds, but ended up going for Serum just because more people use it and you can download it and use it yourself. Now, if you do find yourself struggling with some of the stuff we've covered there or finding it a bit difficult to follow along, we do offer extra online one-to-one tuition. We can obviously look at sound design in Serum 2, Diva, and some of the other plugins that I've used. If you're interested, head down to the contact link in the description below. You can basically just ask me questions about synthesis, what we could cover. I can even make you a very short lesson plan suited around your genre and your music to focus on synthesis specifically. Let's now have a look at some of the other bass sounds in the track. And we're going to start with this alt bass sound, which I think just plays in this one moment right here. It's used in this gap created by our drums and our bass, and it sounds like this. If we look at our notes, it is playing the F sharp, which is our relative minor key, the A, and then the F sharp on the top. And the synth patch is just simply this kind of softer sine wave that I found within this wavetable. I put a bit of tube distortion on the warp modifier in Serum 2 here, and then I've also added in another sine wave oscillator at harmonic number 3. And the only other thing I did was I've added envelope 2 here to the pitch of oscillator A, and it's a very, very short envelope, no sustain, 14 millisecond decay. And it's just adding this little click at the beginning that I could hear. In terms of effects, we just got this single compressor that's doing a lot of compression with a very fast attack and a kind of medium level release. But that's it for that sound. Let's move on to the build-up bass sound, and it sounds like this. And before we go into the synth patch, I just want to talk about the notes that are being played. This is basically following the bass line that comes in the drop a little bit later on, where we go from D to C, and then we drop down to the 7th note, B at the bottom there. But then there's a very interesting change that happens halfway through the section where the bass drops down and it actually goes into a slightly different key. The actual notes move down by 7 semitones from D here down to G and F sharp. And when you turn on the C sharp Phrygian scale, you can see it's now out of the scale. But when you listen to it, it doesn't sound like it's out of place or it's out of key. It seems to fit very well with the section before. And the reason I think this is because the notes jump down by that 7 semitone drop, as we said before, which moves us down by a perfect fifth. And this kind of relates to the circle of fifths. It's pretty complicated, but one of the big features about the circle of fifths is it's very good at identifying keys that are very similar to the key that you're working in. And all you have to do is move up and down by a fifth, a perfect fifth, which is 7 semitones. So us moving down from C sharp here to F sharp, which is kind of our new key center. We're going from C sharp Phrygian to F sharp Phrygian. And those two keys are very similar apart from just one note, which is our G note here. So that's why it doesn't sound too out of place. And it creates this really nice contrast then when we jump back into C sharp in our main drop. And along with some extra layers like the sub layer underneath and the drums coming in at this point, it provides this really nice kind of turn of feel. The track starts to feel a lot darker when we get to that section. Now let's take a quick look at the patch. Just got a square wave, importantly not a saw wave for this. And the key feature really is what the filter is doing to create those wob sounds that you can hear. The filter here is MG ladder, and I've got the cutoff very low with envelope 2 controlling pretty much most of the range of the cutoff. Envelope 2 has a little bit of an attack actually, 15 milliseconds to get that kind of wob at the beginning, and then no sustain and a fairly long decay, 800 milliseconds. And then on envelope 1, I've got the release at 200 milliseconds, as you can see. And just to point out as well, talking about phase before, I've also got the random on 0 and the phase position on 0 too. I've also got the octave at +1 for some reason. But the most important part of this is LFO 1. So this in the original track might have been done with automation. They might have automated the cutoff to come up and down in loads of different ways, but it would have taken me a long time to work out those exact movements. So instead, I'll show you a little trick and how you can get this effect without doing any of that. And it's using an LFO. So I've attached an LFO as well to the cutoff. and that's moving up and down. And it's in free mode, as you can see, not re-trigger, which is very important. So it's just going to freely move in the background when the notes are playing. And then the rate, I've gone for something interesting, where I've enabled the dotted notes here, and I've set this to 1.5 bars. If I'd have set this to 1 bar, you hear we get the exact same rhythm, the same cut-off movement every single time we go through those sections. And that's why 1.5 bars, you get this. Where different notes in that sequence are being brought up and down in their cutoff. And you could also pick a triplet value as well, or another dotted value too. And this will create that kind of random feeling that you can hear in this bass. And I've not only just used that on the cutoff, if you look at envelope 2, I've also assigned this to affect the attack, very, very small amount, and the decay. So it's moving the attack and decay up and down. That's why the notes seem to get longer and shorter. And after this filter, it's also running into filter 2 over here, which is a high pass filter. And it's because I'm basically using these on the macros as well in the bottom left. So the macro LPF is low pass filter. It starts very low and then it comes up at the end of this section here to get that long sustained note. And then it slowly increases at the end too. I've also assigned this macro one LPF to the decay and the release as well. So as we are increasing the cutoff, the notes are also getting longer and longer too. And the high pass filter is just controlling this filter 2 here, which filter 1 has been set to filter 2. So it's running into that after it is processed it. And this is really just for the beginning because it's kind of slowly fades in. Now let's move on to the intro synths that we can hear at the beginning, which are really cool because they kind of bend independently of each other. And I did play around with using MPE for this, but I actually opted to just use pitch bend and glide to create these bends. So you can see they're all separated into 3 different layers, and we start out with just 2 at the beginning here. And in terms of the actual notes, really they're just playing these 2 notes. This is the top layer. The bottom layer is also basically the same, just the 2 notes. But you do have this very fast bendy section in the middle, and then this final note up here, which goes up to F sharp. But they're both just playing C sharp and D again, just like the post-drop bass line we talked about before. And then after 4 bars, we get this higher layer. And as I said before, the really interesting part about these is how the notes bend and the pitch bend. We just take a quick look at the top layer here in envelopes. You can see lots of bends, one going up at the beginning, one coming down in the middle, and then a big one leading into the next bar. And at the same time, when we look at our lower bass, we have the same bend at the beginning and the same one at bar 3. But then we also have this bend that's actually created by the notes at the end of bar 4, whilst our other synth is coming down in pitch bend. And then when we come over here to the end, at this point, the vocals come in. And then at this point, when the drums come in, this middle lead sound actually changes its pattern. Instead of going up, it starts by actually coming down, which is a counterpoint melody where the low notes are moving upwards and the high notes are moving down. So they're coming together instead of moving in the same direction as they were before. it creates this really nice end to this section, a nice variation. But all of the stuff that's really happening in these sounds is happening in the synth patch itself. So let's take a look at the high lead, and all of these really just focus around these big saw waves. I've got a saw wave here with a unison of 5, and the detune is actually quite low on this first one. The second one is another saw wave with a slightly different shape. This is set to unison of 4 with a bit of a higher detune. I've also then got a noise over here, just the default AC hum noise of Serum, and these both get ran into filter 1, which just has a very high 100% drive, and there's some more distortion in the effects over here, but the key part of this synth is down in the bottom right, where we've got mono mode turned on and legato mode, but we've got the portamento, the glide, turned always on, and this is set very high at 283 milliseconds, and this is creating these bends between the notes. Then onto the low, which is very similar, loads of weird wave shapes, but the idea is very similar, where we've got high unison values, quite a lot of detune, another oscillator which looks basically exactly the same, but you see the harmonic is set to number 3. If you just listen to 1, sounds pretty good. We add this one at 3rd harmonic. It adds all that extra thickness in the middle. And then this last one, I believe, is a sub, but it's controlled by macro 1 in the bottom left. So, and that's because there's a section later on where the sub actually comes in, no sub at the beginning, and then it comes in a little bit into this section. The other interesting thing I added to this to make it a bit more distorted at the beginning is just on envelope 2 here, is being assigned to the detune of this oscillator C. So we're having more detuning at the beginning of each note, and then it kind of settles. I actually think this is probably another synthesizer. Like in Diva, there is an option to have 2 separate glide amounts between different oscillators. So one oscillator can glide a lot faster than, say, another one. Whether it was intentional, I don't know. It's probably just a preset, I can imagine. But this is how I've done it in here. I've got some noise as well. And the filter isn't being used here, but I'm actually using it to route these oscillators into bus 1. So you see filter 1 is on A and C. There's no filter actually activated, but if you look in the top right, it's set to none, and the bus is set to 100%. So that's routing these 2 oscillators to bus 1. And that means that I can add loads and heavy distortion into bus 1, loads of processing. And then if I want my sub to be still nice and clean, I can just leave that to go out of the main channel, or I wanted to send it to bus 2, I could do that, and then out to the main channel as well. The last thing I forgot to point out here is just, of course, we've still got the same setup. I did have this not in mono mode at one point, but it should actually be in mono legato mode. Long portamento time and always on again, 446 milliseconds. And you'll see in this MIDI clip here that in order to create these bends like at the beginning, I've actually just used this technique where you put a note in and then you quickly bring your second note in very early on, and it creates a bend instead of having to, say, use pitch bend. And that same effect or technique is used here too. All together they create this really lush, thick bass sound. Here too. And that's the track. It's quite a short one compared to some of the ones we've done recently, and the track isn't super complex, but more of the focus of the track is on the rhythm rather than the melody, and also on the sound design too, which is just a very common trait within dubstep, post-dubstep, whatever you want to call it. Of course, I can't really talk about the vocals because they are copyrighted, but most of the time the vocalist sings the note of C sharp, which is our root note. There's loads of delay and effects put on those vocals just to fill in any empty gaps in our beat. And of course, there's a lot of changes that happen later in the song, but really, this was the thing when I first heard this track that I liked the most, so I wanted to recreate this for you. As always, check out the extended version of this tutorial in our Patreon. It's only £5.50 a month, and as soon as you subscribe, you'll get access to all the other track analysis extended versions that we've done and the sample packs. Plus, for some of the future track analysis videos, I'm also going to be putting some polls on there. So if you become a free member, you'll have access to those polls too. As always, to help out the channel, like and subscribe. Drop a comment down below saying if you enjoyed it or not, and also if you have any suggestions for future track analysis videos. But thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you in the new year.